Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. These days we have to do a lot more with less, and as people begin to sort of organize their communities and try to prioritize coming together as a team, we find that we have a lot of questions sometimes. Starting most broadly, we have the question of how to grow a community. More specifically than that, we have the question of how to organize that community for a common good or a common defense. And even more specific than that, we have general questions of how can we fit into this sort of overall plan and overall goal, and how can we put our skills to good use. So today we're going to cover a very, very niche topic and answer some questions and maybe get some ideas flowing on how to set up your own prepared citizen-based S2 shop or intelligence shop. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes of this, I really want to stress that perspective is everything, and you really have to manage your own expectations moving forward with whatever you might want to do. Since there is no one-size-fits-all way of organizing things or setting things up, we really have to understand the scale of a few different things. This may get a little abstract for a moment, so please bear with me. As we can see from this chart that is very loosely based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have a lot of different room to maneuver here depending on what you want to do and what your needs are. Just to put things as simply as I possibly can, if you're wanting to set up your own S2 or intelligence section shop, remember S2 is the Army's way of saying the intelligence section of a military unit. It's different for other branches. N2 is Navy, J2 is Joint Environment, things like that. But just as a little brief bit of nomenclature, S2 usually refers to the intelligence section. So for those of you who are trying to set up a prepared citizen intelligence shop, it's probably best to consider three main things. The first of which is the emergency itself. You really want to understand that if you are a small 1 or 2 man intelligence shop that is serving your family or your local community, and it's your job to figure out what's going on and what's going to happen next, you're probably not going to be super effective if your mission is to tackle one of these higher level nation-state problems, right? One guy is probably not going to be able to put together an entire intelligence briefing detailing like a 9/11 style event or something. It's just not going to happen. And if it does happen, it's going to be very, very condensed. If you think about the way that I myself do the wire reports, for those of you who are aware of those sort of daily news updates sort of things, I cover international and national level news a lot of times, and the details are very few and far between. So you have to realize that the nature of the emergency is going to dictate what your level of response is going to be. I'm going to have a very different outlook if I'm trying to tackle a nation-state level problem like a Chinese spy balloon incursion or a terrain being held by a foreign adversary sort of thing. That's going to look very, very different as to, like, say, a hurricane or some sort of other natural disaster. Not only is it going to look differently based on the content of the emergency, but it's also going to look differently depending on the scale of the emergency itself. So if you have a localized community emergency, that's going to have a very different outlook than, say, a national level incident that you may not be able to get that much information on. The other two things to think about, which are probably a little bit more directly helpful, are the physical terrain that you are trying to monitor and the number of people you have to help you. These two features really impact the fourth unspoken sort of problem that you're going to face, which is time. For the physical terrain, you really need to understand and nail down and figure out how big is your area of operations. For most military intelligence and even civilian intelligence work, we pull out a map and we say, you're responsible for all of the intelligence that happens in this circle on the map. This is your area of responsibility. It could be a state, it could be a county, it could be even just your own little street. But you need to figure that out pretty quickly. Now here's the challenge. When it comes to the prepared citizenry side of things, your AOR is the whole planet usually. You're generally not going to have like a military hierarchy here, right? So this is where the doctrine kind of veers away from the reality of life. You're usually not going to have an S2 shop, a prepared citizen, shop for, say, Colorado, and then another one for, say, Wyoming, and then a whole other one for, like, Illinois. You're not going to have that, generally speaking. If you have a larger group of friends and family that you're trying to kind of organize a little bit better, you may have a little bit more clearly defined barriers. A lot of times it's just passively, it's just instinct, right? So if you've got a lot of friends that are kind of dotted around the country and you hear of something happening that in an area that is near one of your friends or family members, you contact them because they are in that area of responsibility. So for instance, if I knew someone out in California and I had, there was a pretty big wildfire going out there and they were near the area, or at least within an hour's drive or so, I'll contact them and see what they know because that is their area of responsibility. They would probably have a lot more information because they're closer to the area. So again, this is very passive, it's very nuanced, it's not very clearly defined a lot of times, but generally speaking, you know, if your job for your family is to monitor everything, then you're not going to be able to monitor very much. So it's very helpful to have people in other states or other even cities in your own state that can help kind of monitor things in a similar fashion to you in their area. So in a perfect world, we could have an intelligence shop set up with all of these people involved in different areas of the country, all linked together and all sharing information in a very highly efficient way. That's just not a reality right now. And if that level of organization does come about someday, there's probably going to be other, problems that arise from it. But generally speaking, your area of responsibility needs to be a little bit more clearly defined than just saying the whole planet, even though that's probably what's going to happen most of the time. Another thing to consider is personnel. Personnel is going to be very important for the prepared citizenry. Why? Because we're all volunteers usually. You can't pay people to set up an S2 shop. Like if you're trying to set up a more prepared citizenry community, you're trying to get people together, friends, family, coworkers, you're probably not going to be able to pay them. So you're going to be dealing with volunteers. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's actually advantages to going with a volunteer sort of organization, but it just means that you might not be able to rely on a person to sit at the desk when they're needed to most, right? Because they've got to take care of their own family and things like that. So you just have to factor that in because that's going to become a problem when trying to set up any sort of prepared citizenry group or community, watch or anything like that. You have to understand the nature of volunteers. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's just something to plan for. You have to realize that. So with all of these considerations, setting the groundwork for how this works, what are the criteria that I'm using to set this up? Generally speaking, I'm assuming a very specific, very niche idea here. So just bear with me again. I'm assuming that this is going to help you the most if 3 criteria are met. The first criteria is some sort of contingent situation, be it a man-made disaster, a natural disaster, something happens around the world that, probably around your country, but it could be a world event. Something happens that is a groundbreaking, event that is not impacting your local area, but is still going to require you to probably go home for the day, go get the kids from school. We're now in a sort of emergency mode sort of thing. It may not be a total apocalypse like thermonuclear war or anything, but there have been plenty of events over the past few years that maybe don't reach quite like a 9/11, scale of utter national panic, right? But may require you to say, well, systems are down at my office today, so I might as well just go home for the day and see how I can help. That's criteria 1. Criteria 2 is your personal security is good to go. We don't want to be slipping into an S2 intelligence role if our personal security is not good to go. Sometimes we slip into the mindset, the rut of thinking that, if all I've got's a hammer, then every problem is a nail. I'm the first person to admit that my first thought when an international or national event goes down that is a big deal, my first instinct is not to slip into my intelligence role. This is my profession, basically, and that's not my first response. My first response is personal safety. Am I good to go in my local area? Am I safe? Is my family safe? Take care of the basics first, right? If that criteria is met, then we can move forward with some of the other stuff. And this is quite helpful because a lot of times, especially in 2024, moving into these strange new 5th generation warfare kinds of times, we're having a lot of disasters. There are a lot of very big emergencies happening every day all around the country. And they're not necessarily impacting one specific area. This is more reflected by cyber attacks, right? A lot of us can, be sitting in our cubicle one day and then cyber attack hits the company you're working for and you're basically toast for the day. So you have nothing to do. They send you home because there's nothing to do. You can't even access your computers or anything. So you might as well go home and work on some prepared citizen stuff. And that leads to the third criteria, many idle hands. Remember, if our personal safety is guaranteed, there's probably going to be a lot of people with a lot of things to do. For instance, even in a very, very severe emergency where you even activate your local community preparedness defense force, right? If you've got a bunch of dudes with rifles and things who have nothing to do because there's a disaster, so they've got some free time on their hands, but the disaster is not directly impacting your area just yet. Do you see how we can maybe get into a situation where we have a lot of idle hands? I know a lot of people somehow think, we're getting away from this mentality, but a lot of people on the internet seem to think that when the lights go out, they're going to go grab their rifle and be an infantryman. And that's just not necessarily a long-term solution. It's a good thing to be prepared for, sure, but not everybody's going to slip into that role. And I would be willing to bet that a lot of dudes who think they're going to go, stand in their driveway with a rifle when the power goes out, I would be willing to bet a lot of those dudes who actually think that's what they're going to do, they would probably be better served doing something like this. So this has happened quite a lot, where we have a lot of dudes who may be trained for something and maybe they can't fulfill their community role. Maybe the power's out, the water's not working, water treatment's not working, but there's not a lot of crime going on yet, or they're in a remote area. You see where we're going with this? We can have a lot of idle hands. We can have a lot of people who the disaster that they prepared for isn't the disaster that's occurring, so maybe we can slip into a role like this. So these are the 3 criteria. We've got a disaster happening that's more of an everyday variety, that's more of it's a serious event, but so it's going to require you to step away from your main life, your main profession maybe, but it's not severe enough to where you're going to be an infantryman up there on the berm, right? So that's the first criteria. Second criteria is your personal security is safe. You're in an area where there's not a lot of crime. It's not going to happen, things aren't popping off really like you expected. And because of 1 and 2, the third criteria is you've got a lot of people who want to help because they either trained for the wrong thing, or they're not cut out to be an infantryman, or maybe that's not their role, or maybe the disaster doesn't call for it, So maybe that's sort of the way things work out. So these are the 3 criteria that I'm kind of starting with right out of the gate for whether or not this process is going to be helpful for you. So keeping in mind all these criteria, all the disclaimers, all the thinking that you have to do ahead of time as to whether or not this is going to be beneficial for you, if you've gotten that out of the way and you have a really specific question, namely, how do I set up an S2 shop and what are the roles and responsibilities of people that may come into my group or come to me and say, hey, I've got some time, my rifle's getting dusty over here because this disaster doesn't call for it, so what can I do to help you? How can I build an S2 shop in an emergency and delegate a lot of these roles and responsibilities to people who may show up or may want to cross-train or whatever? So right up front, before I get into this is just my pure opinion. It's very loosely based on how professional military intelligence shops are sort of arranged, but you're going to have a lot fewer people, so you have to modify things quite a bit. And this is essentially what I would do if I ran the zoo with regards to how to set up an intel shop if I had a team of 4 people. So we'll start with the first person, just if you had just one person, just yourself, and we'll go from there, assuming that you get more people. So starting with the first person, person 1, we're going to call this person the lead analyst. This would be somebody like me. This would be like a one person whose job or talents or skills lie in the intelligence S2 world. Not a lot of us out there, not a lot of people want to, not a lot of people have this kind of military intelligence experience. There's a lot of people who are trying to get into it, and I'm probably going to have to do a whole series on that. But let's just assume for a moment that you've got, just like you may have a radio guy, you may have a drone guy. Well, if you have an intel guy in your group, or if you find yourself being the intel guy of the group, this is you, person one. So if you're by yourself and it is your job to be the intel guy for your family, your coworkers, your small group, I'm afraid to tell you that you're not going to be that effective. You're going to have to realize that your expectation management's a thing. So for me, my personal opinion is I would prioritize three things: comms, battle tracking, and basic IPB, or intelligence preparation of the battle space, or intelligence preparation of the operational environment, or an area study, however you want to phrase it. They're all slightly different things, but generally speaking, these are the three things I would focus on. Comms first. You're going to have to prioritize that first, because, and this is a very strong difference between the professional military world. Not a single intelligence analyst anywhere in any military in the world has to care or know a lot about radios, because it's handled for them. Generally speaking, if you have a military analyst, or even a civilian analyst, or an agency analyst, if they're somewhere, they're going to be there with a commander, or a boss, or a supervisor, or something. And that person who's in charge of them is going to have a radio. So it's all taken care of, generally. In the prepared citizenry space, we don't have that luxury. So as I've said, and will continue to say, if you have information to pass, if you have intelligence, if your job is in the information space and passing information or passing intelligence in some form or fashion, you have to personally be able to transmit that information to whoever needs to get it. That's your responsibility in the prepared citizenry space. Not so in the military world, but here in the prepared citizenry space, it means that you have to. So, the lead guy, if you are the only intel guy for your people or your group or wherever, you've got to also be really Johnny on the spot with the radio. You've got to be really good at transmitting that information. And that means you've got to bring the radio. That is your job, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't so, but it is. You've got to bring the radio, you've got to bring the batteries. First and foremost is comms. And you may not think about it, but comms is actually part of the intel world too, because as you establish links with other people, you're gathering intelligence. So you've already kind of jumped ahead in the intel cycle. For those of you who haven't, are not aware of the intel cycle, I have a whole specific video on that, detailing that in pretty good detail. But generally speaking, in the prepared citizenry world, if you're using something like, the GhostNet, you're starting to develop intelligence networks. You're starting to develop intelligence sources. You see where we're going with this. So you may think that radios are just, BS, or like, this is awful, this is something I don't need to learn how to do. No, if you're in the information space, in the prepared citizenry world, this is a top priority. At least that's what I think. And the reason I think that comms is super important is because it directly helps you with the second one. The second idea, which is battle tracking. You need to be able, most of your intel work is probably going to be battle tracking. Some event going on around the world, and you battle tracking and moving icons around on a map and figuring out how the situation is going and getting into the open source intelligence world with that sort of thing. Again, I have a whole video on battle tracking. Don't need to go into more detail now, but essentially, if all you can manage is getting a radio up, getting links up, and some limited battle tracking of what's going on outside your area or even inside your area, that might be all you can do as one guy, because battle tracking is a full-time job. It's very intensive. It's usually a 2 to 4 man job in the military if you're doing it in like a professional TOC or tactical operations center. But as one guy, it's going to be overwhelming. If you get behind 5 minutes, if something's going on like a riot, you're trying to track where the riot's developing, where crowds are moving to, it's a nightmare to do as one person, but you may be stuck with it, right? A third criteria to track or do, because this is your responsibility, is IPB, or Intelligence Preparation of the Battle Space. Again, I'll have a whole video on this, but This goes by a few different names. You can call it intelligence preparation of the battle space, intelligence preparation of the operational environment. You could even call it an area study, although an area study is sort of like IPB on steroids. So they're all kind of different things, but basically you need to be aware of what's in your environment and how that affects the battle space. And you should have done it beforehand. You should have done this before the contingency happens. So now's the time. Now is the time to do the IPB of your local area, your intermediate area, and then maybe on maybe a state or national level. Again, there's varying ways to do this. It's all opinion on which is the best way to do it. All IPB products are going to look different. There's no real one way to do this. It's just based on experience and your priorities of what your group is trying to do. So again, just as one guy, you're probably not going to be able to do that much. You're probably going to be able to do comms, battle tracking, and if you had to, some combat style rapid IPB. Again, there's varying ways to do this, but that's probably all you're going to be able to do as one person. So that's person one. Well, say you've got somebody else who's willing to help you out, and you're now a two-person, a two-man intel shop. What can you do with a second person? Well, again, I hate to break it to you, but not that much more. Having a two-person intel shop is pretty much going to be able to allow that first person some rest. Remember, we're usually going to be doing this in our spare time, usually by people who have a full-time job and a family life to maintain. So that first person is going to get burned out like hard. If they're the only intel person for their area or their group and they don't have anybody to help them out. So again, if they try to do too much, it's going to be a problem. So a second person helps out. Now, the second person we're going to call the CUOPS person, or current operations person. Again, in the professional military world, you're going to have a whole department that handles CUOPS. You may have a whole desk of 3 people, 24 hours a day, that handle just CUOPS stuff. So essentially, this is all the current operations, everything that's happening right now. So hopefully, if that person is up to scratch, you can shift that person one, the lead analyst can shift that battle tracking job over to the CUOPS person. Hopefully, that would work out pretty well, and that can be their job. Some of the other things that the CUOPS person could do or should do is manage the event log or deck log, depending on how you want to view it. Essentially, just a log in a notebook, 3-ring notebook or a pocket notebook or something that says, at this time of day, this thing happened. It's part of proper battle tracking, it really is, but a lot of times the event log gets left out if you're the only guy, you're trying to move pucks around on like ATAC or something. The event log gets like either forgotten or just deprioritized. So if you have the time, if you've got an extra person, Person 2 can just do CUOPS stuff. They can do battle tracking and they can manage the event log, and if they're able, they can help write some reports, because again, they are the person who's going to know what's going on. Again, it doesn't sound like very much, right? Well, just having 2 people to kind of bounce these things off of would be really helpful. That way, Person 2 can do all the battle tracking. They can sit there behind their computer and just, move icons around on a map. They can manage ATAC if you're running ATAC on like a server or something. And the cool part about this is that all of these jobs can be done remotely. I'll get to that in a moment, but you can have a person say, hey, I'm going to monitor Twitter or X or social media for this riot which is going on, and I'm going to update the positions of the crowds on ATAC for you. Okay, cool. Well, that frees me up. That frees the lead analyst up to do something like dig more into IPB, get briefings together, do a little bit more deeper analysis, or start writing the bulk of the reports if you've only got 2 people. Do you see how you can now start to provide some producible reports, some products that you can actually create and send or post and distribute to people? So now we're starting to actually look more and more like a legitimate professional intelligence work. Again, with just one person, it's going to be very challenging to do. It's going to be very, very hard to run a professional organization if you're just one person. You really have to set your expectations. With 2 people, it's a little bit better. You can run a decently okay intel shop with 2 people, as long as your community has expectations set. So With 3 people, though, now you can start to get cooking with gas, because adding on a third person to your team, if you have a third person who's willing to come on board and work in your prepared citizen intel shop, that person can be the production manager. And really, their main job would be to do all of the consumable products. They could manage everything that your shop produces and sends out to other people. Generally speaking, if you've got a total of 3 people that are willing to work on Intel stuff in your community, that means you're talking like a larger community. Because from my own experience, you're not going to have that many people in an Intel shop. You may have one guy for a 100-person community, and that's just going to kill that person, who's stuck doing the Intel for a 100-man community. That's pretty big. That's a lot of work. But if you're starting to get into 3 people, you're talking a much larger community than that. But let's just go down the rabbit hole and continue on. Again, this is what I would do situation if I had 3 people. So that third person could be the production manager. Again, echoing how things are done in the real, professional Intel world, you could have a production manager whose job it is to manage all the products. So they could handle your 1-sliders, basically your 1-slide PowerPoint documents, to where if something happens, you guys have maybe seen, I've done them very rarely, but if there is an emergency situation, you've got this 1 slide done on PowerPoint, in which case you can have just a 1-slide overview of what has gone on, what the situation is, overlaid on a map sort of thing, and you can have that person, the production manager, manage that. They can make sure that your 1-slider is good at all times, so that if anyone comes up to you and asks you something, you've got a pre-made intelligence product for them. Very professional, very slick operation. Along with that, it depends on how you might want to do it. We can get into the weeds of this later, but you also want to make sure that person's in charge of the 2-minute drill. You may want to have your CUOPS guy doing your 2-minute drill, but you also, if things are getting pretty heavy and your battle tracker person is overwhelmed and overworked, they're not going to have time to deal with somebody, because if somebody comes up to your desk, comes up to your team and says, "Hey, tell me what's going on," your CUOPS guy can't look away from the screen. He's going to be glued to his computer, right? So your production manager can step in and say, "Hi, how can I help you today?" sort of thing. And your 2-minute drill, there's also the 7-minute drill. Again, military doctrinal term. Just the very basics of it is telling everything that you know happened over the past 24 hours and is likely to happen over the next 24 hours. So past 24, next 24 in a 2-minute time frame, go. It's just kind of a short and sweet briefing thing that a commander can come in and get. This is more along the lines helpful for a prepared citizenry, because a lot of times people are not, you're not going to have the military organization that you might be familiar with if you're like a professional military analyst. You're not going to have that in the prepared citizenry world, but it's still good to keep that in your mind. You don't want to sit there and somebody come up to you and ask, "Hey, what's going on?" and you not be able to tell them. That's unprofessional. It makes you look like you don't know what you're talking about, even though you may know what you're talking about. So taking some time, usually I prefer to update the 2-minute drill if you have it in a script, literally written down to read off, or like bullet points notes, to loosely read off. You could do that. You could just keep it in your head. I do that most of the time, but if you've got a junior guy, somebody who's not that experienced in the production manager role, you may want to make your 1-slider product basically a 2-minute drill. So have a PowerPoint slide that the person could essentially just read off of, more or less, and tell someone a very quick recap. Last 24 hours, next 24 hours, go. That's sort of how that works. Getting into the more larger level of organizations, your GhostNet. This is what the production manager is going to do. That's going to be their job as well. GhostNet is the Graphic Intelligence Summary, or Graphical Intelligence Summary. Think of this as a PowerPoint presentation that gets sent out. I mean, it can vary, but usually it's a once a week product. In most military units, I think it's a once a week, sometimes once a month. It definitely not once a day, but usually a once a week intelligence wrap up of what's going on throughout your area of responsibilities. So, speaking in terms that a prepared citizen might use, this might be a community newsletter. You may want to turn your community newsletter into a Grinsum. You may want to start adding these elements in. If you've got someone who's in charge of like sending out a community email newsletter, I know that's becoming a lot more popular with tighter knit communities around the country. Family newsletters, things like that. You could do it once a week or once a month, and you can, depending on the time frame, you could put together a Grinsum product. Generally, Grinsums are more along the lines for people who are not there. They're for people who have not been battle tracking. They have not been doing IPB for an area. So I always think that a Grinsum should stand on its own. If you're able to take some Grinsum slides, take them, print them out, and then hand them to someone, they should know from that PowerPoint slide you just made everything that there is to know at a higher level that has occurred within your area of responsibility for the past week or so. As a slight side note, that's generally how I have my Intel updates organized. It's a Grinsum, basically. You know, if you have more time, if you have more people, your Grinsum's going to be a lot better. That's why mine's not like super great a lot of times. There's just not a lot of information because my AOR is the world, and I'm putting together a PowerPoint presentation on what happened around the planet in 7 days' time. So, you know, expectation management, right? So if you have a smaller area, if you're just talking about your local community, maybe you throw some things in there from outside the AOR. That's a good Grinsum thing to do. But we can talk more about that at a later time. Just wanted to highlight that the production manager, that's going to be one of their main jobs because your lead analyst is too busy writing other reports and your CUOPS guy is glued to the computer and glued to ATAC or whatever to track what's going on around their area. Another thing for the production manager to do is handle all maps and map production. It would be nice if all of us had a map maker, cartographer in our team. We don't a lot of times, even in the military. I had a cartographer in my S2 shop once in how many, I don't even know how many years. So, you know, it's not something that's common even in the professional military world. However, there are a lot of people with a lot more, mapping experience than I think in the military sometimes. So if you've got a guy who's got really good at making maps, you don't necessarily have to be an ArcGIS master. You can do this stuff on like CalTopo or other offline mapping applications. You can have this person manage the data packages for ATAC if you wanted to do it that way. That would be a very good job for this person to manage. Basically, you want them to be able to incorporate the major battle tracking items into the map. So you can kind of see how person 2 and person 3 can kind of work really close together sometimes. The reason that you'd still want person 2 to have a relatively, or it looks like they've got a light workload, is because they're glued to their screen. They can't really leave, right? They can't really go away. They're on watch, right? So person 3 being able to take, all right, every half hour, let the production manager meet with the CUOPS guy to figure out what's going on, take some notes, prepare the 2-minute drill, prepare the one slider, update the one slider, and get your, start thinking about the Grinsum, and also start thinking about maps and things that go on maps, right? Since person 1 and person 2 are going to be pretty dang busy, person 3 is usually also going to handle the bulk of report writing. Why is this? Because they've already done it. Usually, if they're going to be handling the one slider, if they're going to handle the 2-minute drill and the Grinsum, they've already got the bulk of the work done in their head. They might as well just put it down, and start incorporating this all together. You could offload some of their work if a lot of stuff's happened and the lead guy has done a lot of the IPB and the lead guy is sitting back and doesn't have that much work to do anymore. They can take the one slider, they can take the 2-minute drills. Generally, that's how it works most of the time. It also all depends on experience. If you've got a really super experienced lead guy, you may want him to handle all the 2-minute drills, the work from like meetings with a commander or something, if you get called into like a higher, organization, if you've got to have a more say deliberate liaison relationship, or you're trying to meet with another group or another agency or company or whoever, right? You may want to have your more experienced guy handle that meeting, so that you don't send your less experienced guy to be the face of your group, right? Again, professionalism is kind of a big part of this as well. So generally speaking, you probably want to put off a lot of the not time sensitive but definitely still necessary work onto a third person if you can, so that frees up the lead analyst to do things like, most of the time I would see the majority of the grunt sum be compiled by the production manager, whoever you want that to be, and then your lead analyst come in and write all the analyst comments, right? So the slide work, the busy work, so to speak, can be done by the production manager, so that you don't waste, your lead guy's time by moving pucks around. If you've got a junior guy that needs the experience, you can put that on them and have them build the slides, build the maps, make everything nice and pretty, and leave space on the slide for an analyst comment box that the lead analyst can write. I did that myself for a few years. It worked out really, really well. It was very efficient, very time-saving. And as time goes on, as your team starts to get more experience, you can let other people take a crack at it. You could also get to a certain point to where your lead analyst is not even touching your grunt sum at all. They're just looking it over, giving it a good blessing, and moving on. Just making sure that there's nothing crazy in there, because a lot of times some junior guys may have some pretty wild assessments that may not entirely be the best sort of way of looking at things. So you may want to make sure that they're not being super crazy in a product that's going to potentially go out to dozens, hundreds, or even thousands of people, right? So that might be how you handle that sort of thing. So again, person 3, if they are more experienced, if they're like on par with your lead analyst, person 3, the production manager, can also be like the liaison, the guy that's the buffer between the outside and the rest of your team. Most of the time this is going to fall on the lead analyst, because, well, your lead analyst is like the core of your intel shop, generally speaking. And since they have more experience, they have more ability to push back against BS, make sure that the BS doesn't flow downhill onto the rest of your team. Your leader, your highest ranking, if we're going with the military idea here, that's probably going to be how this works. It doesn't always work that way in real life, but in a prepared citizenry role, your Johnny on the spot's going to be your lead analyst. But that could easily switch over to your production manager, who can be more of the commander sort of thing of the team. If that's the way you want to run things, that's perfectly fine. Now, fourth person. Now, if you're talking a 4-person team, that's probably the limit. That's about as most as I would want to handle in an intel shop and an S2 shop in the prepared citizenry world. You could double it and have an 8-person team and just do 24-hour operations. But generally speaking, 4 is a great number for a prepared citizenry intel shop. Any less than that, you're going to start running into problems. Your guys are going to be pretty stressed. They're going to be overworked. But any more than 4, you might start running into some internal problems, right? You got to remember, this isn't the military. Nobody's giving us orders. We're all here volunteers. Like, most of the time, everybody's got day jobs to work. Most of the time, a lot of people are a lot older, too. So, let me put it this way. You have a higher chance of personalities getting in the way of work in the civilian sector than in the military sector. In the military sector, you can say, hey, look what's on my collar. Shut up and do your work. That's not entirely the best way of doing things, but sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes, very rarely, but sometimes it's necessary. Do the job because I said so, sort of thing. That's very, very hard to do in the prepared citizenry world. We're all just regular taxpayers. There's no rank here. Nobody's got any rank. This is not how this works. So, again, a 4-person team of volunteers is great, because then you can start offloading a lot of these other jobs based on the people that you have. You could do 2 and 2. You could have a total of 4. Forget the production manager, forget person 4's job, and just run a lead and a CUOPS 24/7 if you had to. But in a perfect world, assuming that we have, we're just doing 9 to 5 stuff or basic incident response. So we're getting the band together for 2 to 3 hours a day if necessary, right? Person 4, and again, in a perfect world, could do FUOPS, or future operations. We also call this plans. It's technically separate, but whatever, we'll go with it, right? This person can handle everything that's going to happen in the future, right? So they can start working on IPB for areas that operations are going to be occurring in. Speaking more of a prepared citizenry role, if you've got like a disaster going on, they can help expand the IPB, because I would be willing to bet that most of you out there, your IPB is never complete. Well, for one, that's just a fact. IPB can go on forever, but most of you will probably find yourself operating in a situation where your IPB is not good enough. It's not sufficient. It may be the bare minimum, but it's not sufficient. So your FUOPS guy can handle that. Anything that's going to happen in the future, that can be on that 4th person. It sounds like it's not a lot, but what the next part of their job is going to be pretty time intensive, and that's collection manager. Again, in the military world, this is normally a person or a department that handles this. Usually it's one person with maybe 1 or 2 underlings, but your collection manager is going to be responsible for, you guessed it, collections, intelligence collections. So all of these guys are going to need information. They're going to need information to process, and they're going to need someone to give it to them. It would be fantastic if they didn't have to go out and get it themselves. Generally speaking, your CUOPS guy is going to be battle tracking, which has a lot of overlay, because what does battle tracking mean for the prepared citizenry? Generally, it means sitting on social media and trying to find details of what's happening. Battle tracking also means tracking friendly units, tracking your own people, things like that. But if you need to get a drone up, that needs to be on that one guy. So drones and local, unmanned aerial systems being used more commonly in the prepared citizenry space is fantastic, but it really is a full-time job. If I had a guy with a drone and he says, hey, I want to help out, the S2 shop, this is what your job is. You're collection manager. And you're not just going to be sitting there flying your drone around. You're going to be managing all the requirements that we have for collections. So if your drone is a good tool to use for that, fine. But your job is going to be matching an asset to the requirements that are given to you by the production manager, the lead guy, and the CUOPS guy. Generally, it's probably going to be the lead guy, really. So again, your person 4 here, if in a perfect world you've got a 4th guy to add to your S2 shop, your intel shop, that person is going to handle everything. They're going to be looking forward into the future, right? So they're going to be looking forward into the future with operations, with any drone work that may be done on a small local level. If they've got a drone, that would be a great role for this person to fill. But it's not just drone work, it's all other sensors too. So imagery, satellite imagery, if they can start downloading satellite imagery for the production manager, that'd be fantastic, right? If they can manage maybe thermal feeds, if you've got like a thermal optic, maybe sit them in an observation post, and that's their, collection. They're actually not just going out there and like racking and stacking collection, right? They're actually getting it themselves. So again, this is going to vary quite a lot in the real world here, but generally speaking, I think starting with thinking along the terms of this is your drone guy, that might be a better way of thinking about it, because I think that's probably how it's going to work out most of the time if you have a 4th person. That 4th person can also handle, if they are, if they're so inclined, they can handle all of the logistics as well. Again, future stuff. So logistics for the S2 shop. Now we've got a 4-person team. 4 people need some management, right? They need some logistics. They need some assistance. And all of these people are going to be very, very, very busy. Person 1 and person 2 are going to be the busiest. Person 3 is going to have the most flexibility in their time, but they're still going to have a lot of reports and things to do. The only issue is that person 3 is going to be able to flex more than persons 1 and 2. Person 2 is the least flexible in their schedule. They've got to sit at a laptop basically and watch. Like, that's their job. Person 1 is going to help them do that, or they're going to be, moving and shaking around, and they're going to be handling a lot of very time-sensitive, stand here, handle this sort of thing. They're going to be standing over the CUOPS guy's shoulder a lot of times. They're going to be the most flexible in terms of the job they do, but the least flexible in terms of time. Your production manager, if they've got time, they go take a nap if they want and work on the grunt some later at night if they choose to. That's their prerogative. Nothing the production manager does is going to be super time sensitive, except for the updating of the products that the lead analyst needs to not look like an idiot, right? So you don't want your production manager to, just goof off all the time. Same thing with your FUOPS guy. Chances are, most of the time, you're probably going to have one of two kinds of people in FUOPS doing the plans sort of thing. Either it's going to be a drone guy, and that's all they do. They're flying around, they're managing the battery management, they're handling all the energy needs for the team here. Or they're going to be a purely logistics guy. So maybe I should have labeled this as FUOPS plans or logistics, because you don't tend to have much overlap between the two. But either way, we're starting to get into unicorn land, because I don't think that many people are going to be able to put together a team of 4 guys to work on just Intel stuff. So that's how I would arrange a team if I was given carte blanche to do what I wanted. And I had myself plus 3 others to form an S2 shop. You can handle pretty much any sized AOR with this. You can do a lot. You can do a lot of stuff. You can be a really high-speed Intel team with 4 people because you've got the ability to do some hard-hitting analytical work, some battle tracking, some producible reports, because intel that doesn't go anywhere, and intel that you don't tell into anyone is useless, right? And you've got the ability to think into the future and plan for other events, right? So that's our job, right? We're not supposed to be journalists. As Intel guys, we're not supposed to be journalists. We're supposed to be intelligence analysts. We're supposed to take in information, process it, and provide an analysis that helps another person, a commander, a force, whatever, figure out what's going to happen into the future and make plans off of that. We're not supposed to just be journalists, right? That's not how this works. So sometimes it ends up that way. A lot of times it looks that way, but really we're supposed to be above that. We're supposed to be a little bit more forward thinking, because journalists are supposed to tell you what happened, but analysts are supposed to tell you what's going to happen. So there's a big difference there. It may not seem like much, but there is a difference there. So if this was the team, let's briefly digress for a moment and discuss survivability. So what happens if, boom, person 1 goes down? Person 1 is either killed, wounded, or captured. What do you do? Well, with a 4-person team, you can easily flex. So if the lead analyst goes down, gets killed or whatever, something happens to them, they're not able to fulfill their job anymore, the CUOPS guy can slide right over and fulfill that lead analyst job. Why would I do it this way? Well, because the CUOPS guy probably knows what's going on more than anybody else. So they're able to stay on top of things, and they're able to start working more with leadership or with other people. It's their battle tracking job is going to suffer, but again, you have to remember, person 1 and person 2's job was done by the same person. It was done by just one guy if all you got's one guy. So it's not that hard of a job to slip them back together and make it so that you're essentially just running with a 1-person team again. Then, if time allows, you can move the production manager up to CUOPS and so on and so forth, or however this works out. In the prepared citizenry space, in the military it's devastating if you were to lose a member. If you had a 4-person intel shop in the military and one guy gets killed, that's going to be pretty devastating. We try to cross-train as much as possible to eliminate this, eliminate the impact or reduce the impact. You're never going to be able to eliminate it, but generally speaking, in the prepared citizenry world, this may tank your whole team. Right, but again, if we're trying to be military thinking in terms of what our jobs are, if your lead analyst gets killed, your CUOPS guy can slip over into that job a little bit easier. Speaking a little bit less severely, let's just say your lead analyst is out of town. Say they're traveling abroad, they're taking a cruise or something, and something's going down and they're not able to help. The comms are down, they're not able to assist. Well, this is how you could slide that over. Likewise, if the same exact thing happens to your CUOPS guy, well, your lead analyst can then just take over the battle tracking stuff. So the same exact thing happens in reverse, right? So your lead analyst takes back over the battle tracking, probably forgets the deck log, probably forgets the event log. But if your CUOPS guy has been on the job, they've probably got a good process. So your lead analyst and your CUOPS guy can really be synced up and make sure that if one of them goes down for whatever reason, the other can take over their job pretty easily. Same thing happens for if person 3 or person 4 goes down. If you lose your production manager or if you lose your FUOPS guy, well, your lead analyst or your CUOPS guy can fill those jobs as necessary. It really just depends on your people, right? Again, in the civilian world, you're probably going to have to deal with a lot of idle hands. So you're not going to be dealing with people who went to school to be an intel guy. So, most of the time, this is going to be very, very personality and personal experience driven. And this is a huge problem for the military too. Like, even people who went to school, like, I can get some dudes out of AIT or C school or whatever, getting out of they're trained to be a professional analyst and they're landing on my team. And one of them, they both graduated. They're both here. They're both exactly roughly the same age, and they're both got the same level of experience, which is probably none. And they're sitting here on my team, and one dude's a rock star and one dude's an idiot. I hate to say it that way, but that's the way the military is. So even the military, which has a rigid training standard, you get wildly different people. And this happens in country too. You could go on a deployment and find out, hey, look, when we get downrange, don't let, Private Snuffy over there, he is not to touch anything. Put him over there to lick the window. He ain't doing nothing, right? Unfortunately, that happens, and in the prepared citizenry space, that may happen a lot more often than you might want to believe. The difference being is that you can't exactly, if you're an NCO or a low-level officer, you can't exactly send one of your guys home if you're overseas. But in the prepared citizenry space, you can absolutely fire people. You can absolutely say, look, your job is this, you're better suited for this over here, or so on and so forth. It's harsh, it's unfortunate, but it's a lot more possible to make better personnel decisions in the prepared citizenry space than, say, in the military space sometimes. So let's go ahead and wrap this up with some notes and some other considerations to think of. I know this has been very, very information dense, so let me throw some more ideas at you. The first consideration you might want to really rethink, I know I said it at the beginning and I've talked about it throughout this, but really the size of your team and the size of your AOR. A 4-man team can do a lot, but you're probably not going to have a 4-man team. You're probably going to have to take these duties and responsibilities and spread them out. You may have more people, but people who are able to do less. So for instance, you might be the lead analyst. You might have, this is your job, right? This is your role in the prepared citizenry. The lights go out, everybody puts their kit on. This is what you do, right? That's all well and good. How can you put other people to use if they want to help out or if they can help out? You may be able to sit somebody down for really, a couple hours a day. This kind of ties into the next thing to think about, which is volunteers. So I'll cover them kind of at the same time. You're dealing with a volunteer force. So you may have somebody who's able to give you 4 or 5 hours a day, and that's it. They've got to go get some sleep. They've got to go maintain their family life. They've got to go do some other stuff. So as long as you're, managing that from the very get-go so that somebody's not leaving you, during the middle of, crunch time, that would probably be a good idea. So a lot of you might be tempted to say, all right, here's our scenario. We live in a moderately sized city in the United States of America. Some event has occurred and we know that riots are going to be planned for the downtown area that night. Well, you might be tempted to call in your team, assemble the A team essentially, too early. You might be tempted to assemble them, right as sunset occurs. And that might not be such a good idea. If you've got a total of 3 people, let's say you've got person 1, 2, and 3, you may want to have that third person, or whoever's, got a better schedule, you may want to have them show up to work a little bit later. You may want to have them punch in, say, at midnight, if you're planning to continue this throughout the night, so that they can get some sleep, and then the second person can go home. That might be how you want to handle things. Personnel management, managing volunteers is a huge consideration. Speaking more broadly and kind of along the lines of the first bullet point here, you really going back to what I said at the beginning, you have to understand and consider the nature of what you're doing here. You don't want to get into fantasy land too much. Unfortunately, in the prepared citizenry space, we're leaning a lot on military experience most of the time. We're leaning on, how the military does things. There's really not that much doctrine out there on how to run things in the prepared citizenry space. If you're trying to just be an average person who's taking an interest in protecting their homeland, protecting civilization in these crazy times, there aren't that many manuals for you to go by. So you might find that if you've got a 4-person team, you are expected to do a lot more work than is fair for one, but also a lot more work than is feasible. So, I really hesitate to say how realistic this is. I'm just telling you, like I said in the beginning, this is just what I would do if I had my choice of how to do things. I would have a 4-person team, and that's about it. Because if you're starting to add more people to your team, you can manage an S2 shop that's larger. You can have, 100-person intel unit if you wanted. But at what cost? And generally speaking, I can't imagine any scenario that would occur where you're going to have a 100-person intel unit as a volunteer prepared citizen entity. If anything, you're going to split this off and have 2. So if you're lucky and you're able to have a 4-person team, and say you get more people, say you've got a larger community and you've got, hey, I really like what the intel guys are doing, I want to go be on their team, I want to go do what they do, you're welcome to. But you may want to start breaking these out into different groups, right? 4 people's good for management. It allows the lead analyst to be a good manager for the rest of them, to be a good leader, right? And if you've got, say, a stronger guy running CUOPS, as they get experience, as this team becomes more of a team, gets more experience, you may start to identify someone who has good leadership potential, and you can take them off of your team to start another team, right? So that's how I would do things. I wouldn't increase the size, personally, it's just my opinion, I wouldn't increase the size more than 4 people. Maybe 6 people or maybe 8 people if you wanted to do 24-hour operations, but 8's pushing it. I think that generally speaking, 4 to 6 people is probably the most you're ever going to get. Now, this can change, of course, because we now have the potential for remote work. The internet's a thing. Of course, there are a lot of situations that are going to require you guys to get together. They're going to require this team to get together, and the internet's not going to be an option. That's one of the worst case scenarios. But in most situations, the internet itself is going to be available. So you might find that a riot is a good example. If you've got a riot going on in a city, and one of your guys is in that city, well, maybe you can assemble the team and help them battle track, their own city. That might be a way of doing it. So you don't necessarily all have to be together in the same place to do this work. It's best if you're, again, thinking of what I would do if I had, reign of things. I would probably want all 4 of these guys to train together as a team, physically train together, patrol together, do things like this together so that they can identify each other's strengths, weaknesses. We could find out who's reliable for some things, who's not reliable for other things, and so on and so forth. Generally speaking, I guess, what is it, like Management 101? You don't want to take a guy you don't know and let them go work remotely without you knowing whether or not they are going to work remotely. I know a lot of companies just seem to just ignore this because most work that's done in the commercial space or business world is useless work anyway. But if lives are on the line, and if you're talking about a serious, dedicated volunteer force, I want the 3 guys working with me to know me, and I want to know them. And, train together. And if you guys have to work remotely, I want to pick the guy that's probably the best fit for that to go work remotely, rather than just saying, hey, Timmy, go take this laptop and, help me, do this from your home over there all the way across the other side of the state. So again, we may be separated by distance sometimes, but generally speaking, most of the time you're probably going to be working with people that close together. Not always an option. I tell you, it is really hard for some areas of the country, for some people. It's really hard to get 4 people together in the same room that don't want to kill each other these days. But again, playing a little bit of fantasy here, if this was an option, this is how I would do things. Sort of like I mentioned with regards to the survivability of this team arrangement, you probably want to have a lot of flexibility. Again, this is just sort of implied, but I feel like this needs to be stressed, because you're probably not going, this is just a template. You're probably not going to emulate this directly, right? You're probably not going to have one guy to lead the lead analyst at his desk and the CUOPS guy at his desk and the production manager. No, you're probably going to split these roles up. Just me thinking, if I was a lead analyst and I had done all the stuff and I managed all my comms, I can automate communications very easily with stuff like the GhostNet, with JS8 call. That's fairly automated. I don't need to sit there and watch that, all day long with my face glued to the screen. I can help out the production manager and do the 1-slider, do the 2-minute drill. I'm going to be given the 2-minute drill anyway, so I might as well do it, right? So there's going to be a lot of crossover in the real world, not as much, clearly defined, nice colored boxes here in the real world. This is just a template that is very loosely based on how professional intel shops are organized in, say, the U.S. military, varying by branch, of course. This is most important to consider with this last bullet point, Murphy's Law. If something can go wrong, it will go wrong, and this is going to happen. So chances are something's going to happen that would be an absolutely perfect battle tracking opportunity, and your battle tracking guy is going to be on vacation. You're going to have an absolutely perfect situation where you're trying to grow your organization, you're trying to grow your community, and you've got this other big community that has they're trying to work with you guys, and you're trying to shake some hands, or maybe you've got a trade show coming up, maybe you've got a range you're trying to do a presentation for or something, and your production manager is going to be out of action or something like that. So cross training is very, very important. Any analyst can fill any of these roles, really. So it's not really based on training or experience. That does play into it a lot, but generally it's what do you want to do? Would you mind battle tracking today? All right, you're CUOPS. Well, would you mind working on the Grint some today? I've got the battle tracking handled. I can do that myself. No, there's no need for a separate CUOPS guy to exist, but can you help me update this week's Grint some slides? That would be perfect, right? Maybe you're just a lone analyst, right? And you're just an intel guy, right? And you're out in the woods with a bunch of other dudes, and you've got a grunt who brought his drone. Well, now you can take advantage of him, right? That's how this works in the real world. If you had a good leader, if you're in an organization that's a little bit more rigidly organized, right? You would say, hey, can I steal one of your guys? Can I steal your drone guy for the weekend? And I can put his products to good use. If he can work for me or work with me, then I can take the images and stuff that he does, and I can put together an intel product for us. See, that's how you can work a lot of this stuff together. You don't necessarily have to do all this other formalized stuff. So it can scale to be as simple as you want or as grandiose and complex as you want. Again, this is largely going to depend on your mission, your environment, the area of operations, how many people you have, and what do you want to do. That's why there's no one cookie cutter situation for any of this. This is a really big, gargantuan topic to start with, but hopefully this helps figure out how you might want to start organizing things. So that's pretty much how I would do things. I know that this is a lot of information to take in. I know it seems like a deep dive, but trust me, this isn't even a deep dive. This is an introduction to the topic. There's a lot more that you can go down, and I can have a dedicated video on each one of these jobs here. So I may do that at some point if you guys are interested in that. But generally speaking, this is what I would do. I don't think this is strictly my opinion on how to do things. This is, loosely based on what the military does in pretty much every branch. But the part where my opinion comes in is where this is adapted for a largely citizen-based, volunteer force, and not a military, organization. So, again, I know this is a lot to take in, but I think this is probably a good start. So I think I'll call it for today and let this soak in like a hard rain, and we'll see what else is more helpful to tackle next. Again, a lot of this is all theoretical. A lot of this is all untested. But generally speaking, this is probably a good way to go if you're looking at this very, very specific topic. So that's all I have for now. Thank you guys all for watching. Thank you for all of your support, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.